150 years ago, the most powerful solar storm in recorded history hit the Earth. Richard Carrington sketched its magnitude in 1859 whilst observing the bright flashes of a solar flare on the surface of the Sun. But could this massive Carrington solar event of 1859 have had broader effects than anyone originally assumed? Let's go back to the Australian Gold Rush, 1859, and find out what happened. Imagine your posturing self-assurance as you parade on the dockside of Port Melbourne, dressed in the finest fashions the colony of Port Phillip can offer. You turn and your beautiful new bride is elegantly bubbling beside you by showing off the latest copy of High Paris Couture. Yes, my boy, you've made it. The year 1859. You came to the Victorian goldfields a pauper and struck it rich. You look across the bay to Frankston, Mount Martha, Dramana and Tubba-Rubba, where shortly even more goldfields will be pegged out. This was an era like no other, and rags to riches were common, with no conniving government tax collectors to strip you of your Paul Hogan fortune. Now, with ritzy wealth reflected in your grand finery, you are boarding the luxurious steam clipper Royal Charter to fast tack up Port Phillip Bay and head home to England. Doubtless, the gentry will fawn over your newfound colonial riches. This sleek iron sailing ship is a modern technical marvel. She's the fastest steam clipper in the world, and on this trip she will break the Melbourne to England record by touching down in 58 days. Built for the Australian run, she's 80 metres long, weighs 3,000 tonnes. She is carrying 388 passengers and 112 crew. But what else? This is a gold ship. She is bursting with over 70,000 ounces of gold. That's $98 million today. Also, she has 48,000 newly minted sovereigns and the personal gold wealth that was uncalculated of passengers who struck it rich on the Victorian goldfields. As you steam by Perth on September the 1st, 1859, all the passengers are delighted by an incredible phenomenon. It is the Aurora Australis, but one so bright it lights up the night as if it were day. The Captain Thomas Taylor notes he has never seen an aurora this close to the equator before. Skies all over planet Earth erupted in red, green and purple auroras so brilliant that newspapers could be read as easily as in daylight. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, a brilliant aurora borealis is seen as far south as the Caribbean and Hawaii. This was the largest geomagnetic storm ever recorded, according to NASA. Telegraph systems all over Europe and North America failed. Telegraph pylons threw sparks and telegraph paper spontaneously caught fire. But this was only the first portent from the heavens. Just 2 months earlier, a massive earthquake had occurred in Erzurum, Turkey, a force 9 on the Mercalli scale. Over 16,000 people had perished. Was there a strange connection between these two events? But even stranger coincidences were to follow. The rest of the Royal Charter's journey was pure bliss. The luxury cabins were a delight, the company boisterous, and the sharing of wealth-laden future dreams innovating. As she beat down towards the English Channel, all seemed well. But when she reached the northwestern tip of Anglesey on October the 25th, the barometer was dropping. The master, Captain Thomas Taylor, was advised to put into Holyhead Harbour for shelter, but he continued on to Liverpool. During the night of October, the winds rose to hurricane force 12 at over 160 kilometres an hour in in what became known as the Royal Charter gale. Its direction changed from east to north-northeast, driving the ship towards the coast of Anglesey. At 11 p.m. she anchored, but at 1:30 on October the 26th, the port anchor chain snapped, rapidly followed by the starboard. Despite cutting the mast to reduce the drag of the wind, the Royal Charter was driven ashore with the steam engines unable to make headway against the gale. The ship initially grounded on a sandbank, but in the early morning the rising tide drove her to the rocks. Hurt against the rocks by huge waves, whipped up by winds of over 160 kilometres an hour, she quickly broke up. Most of the passengers and crew, a total of over 450 people, died. Many of them were killed by being dashed against the rocks by the waves rather than drowned. Others were drowned, weighed down by the belts of gold they were wearing around their bodies. The survivors, 21 passengers and 18 crew members, were all men, with no women or children saved. The Royal Charter storm was the worst of the entire 19th century, with a total of 133 ships sunk during the storm. The death toll was around 800. What had caused this unprecedented megastorm? I believe we can look to another event that shows us precisely where our weather comes from. In the heavens, the solar superstorm of 1859, also known as the Carrington event, was the most powerful storm in recorded history. Richard Carrington sketched its magnitude while observing the bright flashes of a solar flare on the surface of the sun. This was the same event that caused the disruption of telegraphs, the extreme glow of the aurora australis, earthquakes in Turkey, and finally the massively destructive Royal Charter megastorm. Quite probably synchrotron radiation poured down on Earth. Temple's observation came shortly thereafter, when he sketched an enormous coronal mass ejection, or CME, with its terrible body blooming out as far as the width of the sun itself, in a solar eclipse a few months later. The electromagnetic connection with the sun controls our weather, not puny mankind with his imagined impact. One more phenomenon occurred that is painfully coincidental and baffles modern science. The worldwide flu epidemic of 1859 was one of the worst ever, according to J. Duffy, causing 500,000 deaths. Could solar flares and the CME's synchrotron radiation stimulate viral growth? Now you might ask about the gold. Well, many an Anglesey resident became rich overnight, and to this day salvage divers seek to recover some of the wealth, but I'm told with no success. Whilst filming on the Jurassic Coast in England, I spoke to one of these professionals involved in the last attempt in 2005. Expert salvage diver John Ledger gave me some souvenirs from his incredible memorabilia: a few lead balls of rifle buckshot, a broken plate and some Royal Charter ship's rivets. These I have with me as I talk about this tragic tale, a sad legacy that has returned to Melbourne some 150 years later.
I want to tell you a story of a place where good folk live, where the water meets the sky, and the wind, she tells no lies.